If I ruled the world, I love them, baby.
Shoot. Alrighty. If I Rule the World podcast welcomes Andy West. How are you, Andy?
All right, how's it going?
It's going
You
good.
know, I was just thinking, I haven't even done an interview since there's been podcasts.
Really? So you've never done a podcast interview, too?
No, I mean, it's been a really long time since I've done any interview.
You did like
That's why.
fanzine interviews, right?
The last ones I did were, I guess, websites and stuff like that, even a couple of video ones. But they were definitely not podcasts, which seem to rule the interview circuit now.
Yeah. Do you listen to any podcasts?
Yeah, I listened to probably 100, a couple of hardcore ones, and some comedians, and a lot of like true crime and weird history and stuff like that.
One's on Charles Manson, I'm going to gather.
Yes, I actually have his autograph on the wall.
You have his autograph on your wall?
Yes, I do. I got it from a friend of mine that used to write to him. He was actually a hardcore kid from Florida.
Okay.
And he was one of the guys from Korn was really into true crime. And he used to communicate. He had all artwork from a bunch of the famous serial killers. And he knew that I was a Charles Manson. I'm not like into Charles Manson, like I supported the murders and stuff. But it's just one of the cases I've always been most fascinated by. Probably because when I got into it, I was a hippie. So I pictured like living that lifestyle before the murders, you know, the whole commune, free love.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting story for sure. Are you excited for the Tarantino movie coming up?
Oh, yeah, totally. Anything. I'll watch like 4-hour documentaries to catch like a 30-second clip I've never seen before.
Now, for someone being such a like, I guess a fan would be a word. When somebody like Manson dies, like I don't know, does that like make you feel weird in some way?
Well, the reason for me personally, it makes me feel weird. Like I don't really mourn him. I mean, I have really mixed thoughts. He was obviously a horrible human being. But he was definitely interesting and hysterical, and I could see why people were drawn to him. If you've ever heard any of his speeches, it's like hypnotic listening to him talk. And he's just he was a smart, interesting guy. But I have to admit, my first thought when he died was, I wonder if the autograph jumped up in value.
There you go. That's the older Andy. Yeah. Maybe the younger Andy wouldn't have thought that way. But I think it's like we always, the human mind wants to listen to and hear and watch compelling things. If there's a kid on the side of the road playing with another kid and there's a car accident on the other side of the road, you look at the car accident. It doesn't make you a bad person. But I think when you talk about these things, you talk about Charles Manson or you talk about why would they interview that person on TV? How could they do that? And you're like, that doesn't make everything about, reading about that person or even interviewing that person as supporting that person. It's just, this is compelling. This is what the human mind is drawn towards.
Yeah, most of these people, like I'm into all true crime, I think are horrible, despicable people, but it's just fascinating. And all morbid history. I'm really into like, some people are into like boats and stuff. I'm just into like the Titanic. I have a piece of coal from the Titanic too. That's another piece, one of my prized possessions. But yeah, I've always been into this morbid history. I just think it's more interesting, and there's always more of a story there than, the basic stuff that you learn in school and all.
Yeah, because it's how does, we always talk about this on the podcast, that nobody's one thing. And when you start to get into like the human mind and how someone could get to a certain point, whether it's Charles Manson or there's a lot of this stuff on Ted Bundy lately.
I see there's all the new documentaries about him.
Documentaries like a reenactment.
Even like a movie too with like Zac Efron and people who I don't know, I guess it's the thing about being good looking, I forget, like there was some some joke or some meme where people were still disgusted with OJ, but like when they see like Ted Bundy, they're like, yeah, you know, he's pretty hot.
Yes, easy on the
Well,
eyes.
it's true. It's sickening. That new guy, the guy who killed his family, Chris Watts. It's like people forgive him because he's good looking, and
That's how good it is to be good looking.
Yeah.
I'll never know.
I know. I can't
It's pretty
even
good, Sam.
imagine.
But yeah, let's talk music, right?
Yeah, you know what? I don't want to talk about serial killers for the moment.
For the moment, we'll
Unless
go
it
back.
comes back up. I want to talk about Andy. And Andy told me, I said, Andy, do you want Andy or Andrew when we do the pick? And he said, it's got to be Andy, because if people call me Andrew, then I know they either don't know me or they're mad at me or they're like an ex-girlfriend or something like that. So
Yeah, basically, my family
I'm gonna call you
is really the only ones. Once in a while, someone at work, because that's what like I write on an application. And in the past, like sometimes an angry girlfriend will be like, Andrew. And it is funny because on Facebook, like just randomly, around my birthday, let's say, when you hear from like everyone for one day,
right.
people that are like, hey, Andrew, happy birthday. I'm like, all right, I know. I don't know that guy, because anyone that's ever hung out with me knows me as Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Or when I was growing up, it was still the last name set thing. So they'll be like, hey, West, happy birthday.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good last name.
It's a
to
good
just
last
be
name,
called.
West.
Yeah.
Like, it's up
Yeah,
West.
it's nice and easy.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I don't think the people still do that. No one calls each other by that last name anymore.
They don't call you
That was
West.
huge when I grew up. There were people I didn't even know their first name.
So let me ask you, you're down in Florida now, and I think of you as such a integral part of Long Island hardcore and Long Island and all of that. What was the reason that you moved down there?
I mean, really, there was a lot of reasons. I mean, a big one is my wife, but she could have easily moved to New York. We grew up 3 houses away from each other, and she's actually good friends with my sister. And it was actually through Facebook. I had asked her something, and we just started talking, and we got real close, so we would visit each other. And then it got to a point where we wanted to just be together. But up in New York, things were not working out for me.
Okay.
Again, without getting specific, I did have some demons, and I was just not moving forward in life. Like, I had lost my license about 7 years ago. I mean, I had a good, steady job that I was at for over 20, for close to 20 years, and I still never like paid my fines and got my license back. I mean, I was down here in 3 months I was driving.
Yeah.
I just wasn't moving forward.
Okay.
And part of it was, I was living in Elmont, which is, it's still an upper middle class, but it's really, like most of Long Island, it's covered in drugs. And it's just, it's weird. It's really, it's like when you were a kid in school and they taught you about pushers that would like when I grew up, it was your dealers were your friends. Just whoever had a little extra would get rid of it. But now it was like these guys would have hours, and you don't call during their lunch break, and but on top of that, they were big time pushers. Really? I mean, I got out of rehab and like a guy like dropped free stuff in my mailbox that day, which I didn't want. Like, he just knew I was getting out and my mailbox locked, and I was the only one who had a key to it, so he knew he could get away with it, and he knew that once it was there, I wouldn't be like, no, take it back. Like, I didn't have the willpower to. But that's the kind of stuff that I dealt with. At the end, I'm very proud because I did owe a lot of money, which I paid off without, I had to see these guys every week and pay the money and not get anything.
Now, was the debt like something that was taken serious?
Oh, it was very serious. Basically, what happened was this guy got a lot of stuff, and he thought he was going to go into business, and he thought I was like, that I had tons of friends that did it, and I didn't. So he got all this stuff.
Just real quick, I just want to place what year that was you're talking about right now.
This was in, probably after Kill Your Idols broke up, so the mid 2000s to now.
2010, 11.
No, I think like 2005.
broke up in 2007, right?
Yeah, but it was.
Yeah, well, that's
I'm definitely very bad with my timeline.
All right, but I got a better.
But it was
Yeah,
definitely after the band. It was definitely after the band.
All right,
gotcha.
carry on, Andy.
At this point we weren't even playing any reunions or anything. So it had to be between like 2007 and 2013 in there somewhere.
Okay.
So basically this guy got tons of stuff and I was his only customer. So what he did was he came to me and he said he was either going to be stuck with it or give it to me. And I had other people that I got from. So basically he was like, if you get from me, I'll give it to you every day on credit. When you get paid, just give me what you can. And, one day we'll settle up. And what happened was, I guess he had a plan, is that this was a guy that was in the Bloods. So he knew I wasn't going to screw him no matter how high it got.
Yeah.
Knew where I lived, knew where I worked. And he went to jail and basically was like, you're going to be taking care of my family while I'm in jail. So,
Holy shit.
Every 2 weeks when you get paid, you'll give them
The money.
this amount, which was, it's not that he robbed me, but, he, at this point, it wasn't just like, yeah, just give me what you can. At this point, it was
No,
like,
it was, and your addiction kind of needed to keep going. It wasn't even like he wanted you to get clean. Like, your addiction was like helping his family in some weird, distorted way.
Exactly, and it was even worse because now I'm dealing with his wife who's pulling up with like her boyfriends, and he was desperate. Like I said, for him it was a job. He was a hustler. We needed something. He would make you wait for hours, and I don't know if you could relate to this, but you're at the mercy of really disgusting people that prey on,
Sure.
they prey on you. And it was like, more than once, like I really had complete breakdowns, like fully in tears being like, my life right now is relying on these complete pieces of shit that, couldn't care about me. They'll take your last dollar. Like,
sure.
I could be like, I can't pay you this week. My landlord, they don't give a shit. When you're still getting stuff from them, that's fine. But towards the end, when I cleaned up, they didn't give a shit. It was like, that's when, suddenly they weren't like my pal anymore. Suddenly it was all business.
Is this, if you want to just go back to the music.
Well, I'm just
like,
curious a little bit too, and I consider you a friend. We've never been close, but I actually didn't know any of this stuff, but I never really knew why Killer Idols broke up. Did any of this stuff, when you called it demons, is it had anything to do with that, or was it a separate situation?
The other guys might say it does. I don't think so, but I'm sure it wasn't. There are guys that were in the band back then that we don't talk anymore, and I'm not even fully sure of the reason. I've heard different reasons, and one of them, was that I was difficult to deal with, which I could see because, I was full blown. They'd come to pick me up, and I'd leave them in front of the house for an hour, before I could come out.
Right.
I don't think, I will say in the long run, I don't think they ever actually canceled a show over it, but
yeah,
it was just, it's a horrible, people glamorize it. It's just, it's horrible to be dependent on anything. And the harder it is, the more disgusting your life is. Like, I'm really lucky that I did have this steady job and I lived in a town where everyone knew me and trusted me because I never did have to rob. Like, I never robbed, to get back to the Killer Idol thing. I never stole from anyone. I never fucked anyone's girlfriend or stole from the band or pulled anything shady like that. Really, I don't think it played into the breakup that much.
Can't think of anything I've ever heard bad about you, to be completely candid. I've always heard good things and that you're a good dude. So that makes
there
sense
was
to
a
me.
period of time around after we did our first reunions that I had a falling out with some people, and it seemed to really like spread. Like, all of a sudden there were, I just kept hearing these people hate me out of the blue. No one could even give me an answer. I would go to my friends and be like, what's the issue with I don't want to mention names, but what's the issue? And it's some of it. It just seems like people like this is a horrible thing, and I don't know if it's with everyone or just members of bands, but in hardcore, people are so willing to believe the worst about you. Like people that I was friends with for years would like turn on me because whatever they heard about me without ever, I never told my side of any story to anyone because I don't even know the other side of it.
Right.
I just hear all of a sudden this person doesn't like me, and that person, and I get an angry letter from someone, again, not even really specifying anything real. Like, I mean, they were ridiculous, and I don't want to stir anything up. That's why I'm being a little cryptic.
For sure.
I don't want to say anything specific because
Yeah.
I don't want to go back down any of those roads or anything. But there was people love to kick a guy when he's down. And the worst part is that a lot of it came from people I considered friends or at least acquaintances. I mean, when you're really in the depths of living that life, only the people closest to you are hurting. People that barely know you, that are a fan of the band, they don't know. They never suffered for anything I was doing.
Right.
I've been on the other side of the coin now, so I've watched other people come close to ruining their lives or ruin them or, lose their lives as a result of bad habits and stuff like that. And I've been on the other side now and felt that anger, but I've never out and out turned on anyone over it.
It's interesting too because you brought up a question. Is it more so in hardcore that it's like this, where people just believe the worst? And I don't think it is. Like overall, there is maybe, again, we're talking about human nature. People will gravitate towards the worst part of the story. But what happens in hardcore, what I've noticed, and especially more as I've gotten older and can look back a little bit, is that people come into this scene trying to they gravitate towards something, and there's an image. So you're trying to be this, or you aspire to be that, whether it's a band or you're trying to be straight edge or better straight edge than you were last year. Now you're vegan. Now you're whatever. So what happens is it's bringing in that, but it's also bringing in damaged people with problems. A lot of people are just, they come to the music because it's loud and it just, a lot of us were fucked up in some way, and that's what attracted us to this music. So when there is something bad that happens, like you hear something bad about you or me or a lot of people maybe even listening to this, people have like a measuring stick. Because it's like, what happened, what someone was from a year ago could be a huge chasm, especially when we were younger. So it's like I know exactly what you're talking about. There's almost like this weird run with the rumor type of thing. And it feels like maybe it's more in hardcore. And maybe in certain times it really is. It's just like a lot of things about what attracts people to this music and, where you are. And people run with it.
Well, one thing definitely, I don't know if it's as true today, but when we first got into hardcore, like, a long, long time ago, once upon a time, everyone that got into hardcore was fucked up in some way, shape, or form. It really didn't offer anything for anyone else. I mean, depending where you were going to and what show, you were really risking your safety to go sometimes. And again, it was really fucked up music for fucked up people. A few years ago, I dated someone that was very well adjusted and had no patience for people that were fucked up. And I'm like, what do you see in this music? Like, what you think everyone's like the Bonds of Friendship album cover, like walking around arm in arm? I mean, it's all fucked up people. And maybe that's coming more from New York than other places because, from what I've read, I guess other scenes weren't as bad. But then you read about like TSOL and stuff, and you realize, people were just fucked up everywhere. That's really, one of the things that this music, like you said, it either drew you to it or it even helped in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think, but when you first get into it, you don't know as much. So you're kind of like, this is great, and things just keep sort of getting better. Maybe you're finding out more bands, you're getting some friends, but you kind of grow in leaps and bounds. It feels like, as far as like your place in hardcore, your or what you're interested in, and then it's like, I'm just saying there's like a measuring stick because you're in a scene, and people start to judge you more because we have like watermarks and we have like things that we're judging it against, So that's why I think it just feels sometimes like, people just are more judgy or more whatever in hardcore or punk rock because you're kind of stepping into this thing that is like people have aspirations in a scene.
I do think in my experience that really, you're right. I might have questioned it actually earlier, but I'm lucky enough to still have a lot of my old friends.
Yeah.
Like all my friends that I went through high school with, none of them got into hardcore. And the few that weren't into hardcore, they went the opposite route I did. Like I was a deadhead and got into hardcore. They were hardcore kids and punks that got into the Dead, which made great for me because I got all their records. But none of them, like all my old friends, they have much more of a like live and let live attitude, and they look at the better side of a person. And these are all guys that have, they're all kind of fuck ups too. They might not listen to hardcore, but they're all, we grew up together as juvenile delinquents and stuff like that. So they have the attitude, just not the music. But none of them, like you said, are as judgmental. And you're right. Like the more you stick around, the worse it gets. Like my first few years in hardcore, like I said, I had no friends. And I used to go, this is when ABC No Rio started doing shows. And I went every Saturday. CB's only did a couple of shows at this time.
Right.
And I went and I read every zine cover to cover. I read every piece of literature that came with every record. And I would buy a 7-inch and watch every band. And it was just the best. I still remember the first hardcore rumor that I ever heard. And it wasn't until I got to know Tyler, who was
rumor?
my first hardcore friend. The first hardcore, like, gossip rumor that I ever heard. Because remember, I didn't.
On me. Yeah.
It was, someone was like, yo, I saw McDonald's wrappers in MDC's van. And I remember thinking, like, well, are you serious? And then, like, not even knowing why that was a big deal.
Right.
But I remember everyone being up and on. That was, like, the first time I was ever like, who cares? But the longer I stuck around, the more I was like, you do get caught up in it to a degree. I like to think I never really, like, ripped people apart, but you kind of can't help it, especially when you go on tour and you see some of the shit that you see behind, backstage and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
What was that transition like from Deadhead to Hardcore Kid?
Oh, it was great. I mean, I loved the Dead. I've probably seen them close to 100 times. They used to travel all around. But the problem was, it was just too big. Like, I remember, I was much more idealistic then and, like, waiting for the Dead to say something. Like, who are these, as I got older, I was like, who are these people that are supporting? Like, I liked their music and I loved the whole party atmosphere, but then that started to get really big. This was like the mid to late 80s. That got huge. And again, just like years later it would happen with hardcore, it really spoiled it. So a friend of mine out of the blue gave me the Angry Samoans Inside My Brain and Milo Goes to College. Keep in mind, I had a giant afro. There was nothing at this point punk about me except I had like Ramones and Clash records. But he was just like, for some reason I just thought you'd like it. And that stuff really blew me away. It was just looking at that picture on the back of the Angry Samoans record where it's just them standing in a bass. Back then the most cursing you heard was like Zappa, something like you didn't hear people screaming motherfucker and stuff.
And then you hear I'm not a loser.
Huh?
And then you hear I'm not a loser.
And not even that, but also the love songs with the Descendants that you could put much more in your own life rather than like these big bands that just sang, generally, they were singing like that you could really relate it to your own life much more. It was still a few years away before I it took over my life, but those were the first records that someone gave me that I was like, this is crazy. And then I went to see like some bigger shows at the Ritz, like GBH, where bands like Warzone and Sheer Terror opened up. I saw The Exploited. And I remember seeing like old people with mohawks and skinheads and being like I literally in my mind was like, pictured them crawling down into manholes after the show. Cause
like Chud.
I never saw anyone like that living, especially in the suburbs of Long Island.
Especially back then.
Of kids with shaved head. Yeah.
Back then.
So it was like, I used to be like, where do these people go where they're not at a concert? And I would love it, but I didn't know, about the whole underground scene. So it would be months before another big show would come. And by then I would be, the feeling would kind of wear off and I would just be back into my regular thing. And when I was at a show, I want to say it was Warzone and GBH, but I could be wrong. Or it might have been the Circle Jerks and the Weirdos. But anyway, someone handed me a flyer that said like hardcore punk Sunday at CBGB's. So, I didn't know any of the bands, but I just knew that I loved this feeling I got when I went to these shows. And I got punched in the head and I was sweating, so there was blood all over my face. I felt like the coolest guy in the room.
You might have been.
But I just loved it. So I ended up going to CB's, and at the time I didn't know who it was, but I remember being like, it was bold, and I was like, there's little kids on stage playing, and they just walked up. There's no backstage tour buses. It really had a big impact on me. And then the next show I went to was the one they filmed for Good Morning America, I think, the Straight Edge.
Yeah, Gorilla Biscuits. They were doing like a piece on Straight Edge. And
yeah.
And I No for an Answer, Gorilla Biscuits, right?
Bad Trip,
yeah.
And Burn. Mm-hmm. And Gorilla Biscuits. And I remember another, one of those moments I'll never forget is Gavin was like, if I see one fight out there, I'm coming off this stage and beating the shit out of all of you. And which I believe he did proceed to do. Yeah. But the first note they hit, I had never seen. Like the Bold, I think it was Bold and Gorilla Biscuits, my first show at CB's, but the Burn show was the first one I really have a memory of that I was like up front, and it's a miracle I didn't get killed. But just the way that place exploded when he hit his first note, like that was it. I was completely hooked from that point on. And at that point there were flyers, the Pyramid was doing shows, not on a steady basis, but I want to say ABC, again, I get my time screwed up, but either they started right after that or they were going right around then. But I just remember getting flyers and starting to go constantly. Another guy who I met was Vinny from Situated Chaos.
Yeah.
Who, anyone from Long Island in that time period knows Vinny.
Yeah, I know Vinny. Cigara?
Yeah. I met him because he was giving a business card. I saw Gore and Situated Chaos at Sundance.
Me too.
And he was giving out business cards.
It's crazy that Situated Chaos opened for Guar.
Well, he was doing the booking, so they opened for whoever they wanted.
Oh, yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
But he was, the first time I went to ABC, they were supposed to play, actually. Mm-hmm. They ended up canceling. But, the shows I saw in that place, like Poison Idea, Jawbreaker, I think I saw twice there. Born Against was like every 2 weeks, and Citizen's Arrest. And
now, while you're going to all these shows, like, are you just like taking mental note and feeling inspired enough to basically just feel like you want to start a band, you want to sing?
No, the band thing was still very far. At this point, I was still trying to get someone to come with me. Find a friend. I was still going alone, which
really,
in some ways, was the best. Like I saw Anti-Schism there, and they had a bunch of PETA information in there. 7 inches. Like literally that night I went home and I didn't eat meat for another 20 years.
Wow.
I remember my dad not even like thinking it was a fad. Like we're Hungarian. We grew up with like goulash and like beef on everything. And, he thought it was a fad, but like literally overnight there was no slip ups, like I said, for 20 years or so.
Yeah, for sure. If I told my grandmother or my dad that I wasn't eating meat, they just wouldn't comprehend.
Well, to the day he died, he still never got the word tofu right. He'd be like, "What are you eating? That tiffle stuff?" But
there's still, it's the classic thing when someone's like, "All right, we'll just have chicken."
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, you know what I mean? I'll take chicken.
Yeah.
No, they got it from the beginning. They knew exactly what I was doing, that I wasn't eating meat or fish, that, anything cooked, because, again, it was very idealistic. So, I went through that phase where I'd walk in and my mom's cooking and I'd be like, it smells like dead flesh in this house. And, after a while you become more accepting of others. But I think every vegetarian goes through that phase where I was like, you're not straight edge if you eat meat. It's that simple, like really self-righteous about the whole thing.
Right.
And actually, my dad was proud. He did come up to me one day. He was like, I never thought you would stick with it, but you really actually did.
But you actually admitted self-righteousness, which is rare, because usually most vegetarians don't ever say that. I was never really like that. I was never one of those guys. I've never really. But you kind of just said it like you.
I was completely, like I said, I fully believed, like, if you ate meat, like I'm telling Choke, one of the founders of Straight Edge, like that because he eats steak, he's not straight edge, that would be like me telling Black Flag, you guys don't know how to tour.
Right. Listen,
but yeah, it was one of the few things in my life, because I really normally have low self-esteem, but it's one of the things that I was. So I think I went through a little self-righteous, like straight edge vegetarian phase. I mean, every straight edge kid says that they're not self-righteous, but yeah, every party you go to, you just stand around making fun of anyone who's not straight edge. Like, it's not made up. I mean, it's the truth.
I can never separate where, like, the straight edge making fun of people was the way they are. The Long Island, make fun of everyone, rank everyone out is what we would say back then. Or the self-righteous, like, straight edge thing. Because there was a lot of, like, straight edge kids on Long Island. They were just masterful at making fun of people, us, me, probably, because we were drunk and whatever, and maybe they were just like a ninja at it. They were just like a double whammy of like straight edge self-righteousness and Long Island, like, fuck with you type of thing.
Well, it's funny because I also went through another thing. I think because I was older and straight edge, there were certain people that, this was like the whole scene, and again, I'm sorry, Sam, I'm not sure when you came around and stuff.
Oh, yeah, no.
George, I know from way back when Tyler was booking Mind Over. It was like there were two scenes on Long Island. Sundance would be hundreds of kids, and then you'd go to a smaller club show with, like, you guys and Merge, disciplinary action, Third Column, and there'd be
there was the
same
shows everyone went
kids.
to, and then there was us. Basically.
But it wasn't
later.
just you guys.
Later.
There was this little Long Island scene. Like I remember even seeing, Third Column. Like, I don't know if nowadays, in a day where Civ has to make a public apology for saying all lives matter, I don't think a band like Third Column could even exist.
Nah.
But, again, they played alongside, everyone else back then, and it was a very small thing. Carol's Place, Scandals. It was like, but then you'd go to Sundance and there's hundreds of kids.
Right, but Sundance kind of ended, whatever it was, 91 or whatever it was, and then things sort of, it was really small, but 92, 93, 94, things started to pick up as far as the smaller Long Island bands.
That was the first time it fell
apart. Tyler
apart.
booking and Common Ground Collective and all that stuff.
And then the place in Mineola started up.
The Angle was really good.
Yes, and the scene started to get big again. And then at that point, I stopped going. I went to shows there, but sometime during that point, I kind of stopped going to smaller. I'd still go when Circle Jerks came around or bigger bands, but I really was. This was my attempt at living the 9 to 5 life at this point. And then by the time I came back, Long Island had grown. You guys completely blew up, and bands like Silent Majority and Clockwise were, they were ruling the day. I remember I went into a deli, and I think his name was Paul. I think he played in both bands at different times.
Yeah, Paul Brinkman, right? Has to be.
I don't know his last name. I know he went back and forth in both bands at some point.
Yeah, cool dude, man. Awesome guy.
But he made me a tape of Silent Majority and Clockwise, and at this point, I hadn't heard them, and I was like, "This is what happened to hard." I was offended by this, and this was. I'm not gonna deny it was definitely more narrow-minded, looking for expecting Crackdown and sheer terror.
No, but I gotta tell you, Andy, to interject right here, there was a moment. I remember all the people I used to go to Sundance with were a certain type of hardcore, and you know what I'm talking about. Tough guys, music that was harder. They didn't know anything about the Long Island Mind Over Matter, Silent Majority, that stuff. Clockwise coming up. And then right around 93, 94, I remember a couple of guys that hadn't gone to shows in a while had said, I heard, the new Long Island scene isn't, there's, no, people don't mosh. There's no, fighting. It was, a serious question.
Yeah.
They didn't believe me. And I was
they were
nah,
bummed
dude,
out.
That's not really how. I mean, it sort of came back with a bang once, the VOD era came in and, then bands from the city came in, 25 to Life and Madball and all that came back full force. But there was a moment where it was kind of a little peaceful for a second, and they were I don't know about this. And I'm no, I'm telling you, man, this is how it is. My band's
at the risk of sounding corny, it was a beautiful time. I mean, when the PWAC was in its heyday, and there could be a show that was CR, Silent Majority, you could have 4 or 5 bands that didn't sound alike. Everyone loved every band. There was never a small crowd. There was no fights. It was really the hardcore scene on Long Island. At that point, bands were skipping New York City to play Long Island. I mean,
yeah, that's true. It was the fun for a short time. And it was I used to think of it as an after-school special. PWAC was you'd come in, open the doors. There was the best graffiti artists did graffiti. There was skateboard ramps. There was Christian had a little record store, on the side. There was a small room in the back. I was this is shit when you would see, you'd be that only happens in California. It doesn't happen in Long Island, New York. But it happened for a minute. It wasn't years. It was just a little while when things kind of was at a peak. It was after Mind Over Matter broke up too. It was
guys had already finished.
Yeah.
And I mean, Silent Majority was they were the Billy Joel on Long Island.
Yeah,
hardcore.
absolutely.
And and again, I definitely want to stress that I came to love Clockwise and Silent Majority, and my mind, it really opened my mind to a lot of stuff. I mean, there was so many good bands of all different styles that were playing together, and even the tough guy thing to a degree, Tension was part of that whole same scene. Again, early on, I don't know. I remember that 7-inch came with a note explaining a big fight. I wasn't around for that, but Joe was as cool with everyone as Tommy and Artie and everyone.
Absolutely, and they were creating their
good time.
own scene, and Shirley Mastic, a whole different thing. And then things started to merge. We became friends with those guys, and things just got bigger because then their friends never heard of some of the bands that we were in, and we never heard of their bands. And then we all became friends, booking shows, and and then even the violence thing, it's always brought up, and I hate to say it, but I've said it a bunch of times when I first started going to shows, I was attracted to the violence. I was never a violent kid. I was never like a fighter or whatever. But going into CBs and seeing all these different things, like if I didn't like it, I would have left. But it was just crazy, and it was like compelling, like we said in the beginning of the.
Yes, that's exactly the right word.
It was like these people are nuts, like I feel crazy too. I was never really that type, but it was a world, that I didn't know about.
It was worth the risk, really. This is what it comes down to. Like, you never knew what was going to happen. Like I same as you. I've never been a violent guy, but I've definitely been a very angry guy. But just all of that was a part of it. I mean, you remember during the early 90s, I don't think a show ended in New York City without a fight. I think every show basically ended because a fight broke out.
Right. There wasn't three.
That was like the last CB's matinees for years. Like Killing Time and Sheer Terror, I think, played that last one. And I think somebody pulled out a gun or something.
Yeah.
But Long Island, and again, I do get my timelines confused, but Long Island, I know it was the mid-90s because I know it's when Kill Your Idol started. Because we were like, we got to do something about this. Hardcore is in grave trouble.
So, talk about that. Yeah. Like you starting, or how did you get into Kill Your Idols? What happened?
Basically, at this point now, after years, and getting kind of, like I said, I drifted away for a little while, and then I came back to it. And like I said, at first, I'm not going to bullshit. At first, the softer stuff was like, I'm not going to go as far as to say offensive, but I was like, this is, there's no punk to this hardcore. This is just like a step away from soft rock. And and I was friends with, I had met Gary when he was in Big Sniff, and I've always, melodic stuff is always my favorite style. There's so many bands I've seen through the years that are great, but the second they're done, you don't remember the hook, you don't remember a chorus.
You sound like me.
That's I've heard you talk about it. You're like, that's what I like. I love melodic stuff. Bad Religion was like my favorite band for years. From Suffer to Generator, perfect. Even bands like No Effects, like just like I said, anything. The first Gray Area record.
Oh, I was listening to that yesterday, actually, the first one. I like the second one more, but I mean, man, those two Gray Area records are perfect. They're just like so much melody.
They're amazing. And getting to know Vinny and hear a little more about the songs and stuff, they're one of my favorite bands. They're the last band I saw that gave me, like, I remember leaving and thinking, like, wow, does my band make people feel the way this just made me feel? Like I was completely high off the music.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, to get back to it, so everything was just really, it was either Tough Guy or that Long Island sound, which to me at that time was not really, punk. And to me, like at that time, if you called a hardcore band punk, it was like an insult.
Yeah.
But I came from a time where it was hardcore punk. That's what it was. And
People
Gary
Black
was very similar.
a hardcore band,
Or like Minor Threat.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Until I think New York hardcore kind of branded hardcore as a different thing with a more of a metallic guitar thing, or, Victim in Pain was clearly the first hardcore, but then there's Cro-Mags. And I think that's what changed, like, people saying, I like hardcore, not punk rock.
Yeah, and again, it became like an insult to some of these hardcore bands if you called them punk or compared them to punk or something. But where my mind was at, and again, I'm going to incorporate Vinny Segura from Situated Chaos into this, because I used to talk to him about it, because he always wanted to do a band, but the problem was neither of us played anything, so we were both singers by default looking for a band. And I don't know why he didn't end up trying something, but he introduced me to Gary, who I had met previously. And at that time I was living in Copenhagen. Gary lived like 2 towns over, and so we just discussed, we got on the phone, me, him, and Ron Grimaldi, we three-wayed. And we talked about the bands we love. I remember specifically naming I'll get back to why I specifically remember these bands, but naming Poison Idea, Voorhees, 7 Seconds, Agnostic Front. These were all bands we named that, we wanted, Breakdown. These were all bands we wanted to do something a little more like, and also we named some punk bands like DVH, the Angry Samoans and stuff like that. But so we spent that night talking, and then Gary came back like a night or two later. We got stoned and we made waffles and put ice cream on them, which is his like big memory of the night for some reason. And he came up with this one riff, and I had lyrics to it, and it ended up becoming this song, our first song, which was called 10 Cents a Day, about like child labor and stuff. And Gary was a singer. He basically taught me stage presence. And again, we were a little older. We weren't in our teens anymore.
You're saying Gary did? It broke up for a second there. You said
yes,
Gary was here?
sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Gary was very much like, you can't be so meek. You got to be like, not like Paul Bearer, but, and he really taught me a lot about like professionalism too. He was like, I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, I'm in some shitty punk band. He's like, I'm not going to be in a shitty band. He's like, between you and me, we'll get, and at the point, that time we had Ron on drums, but Ron didn't know how to play drums. It was like going back to the beginning of hardcore where people didn't really know how to play. So Ron didn't last long. It was on good terms. He knew we basically... Gary's way too talented to be playing with someone that doesn't know how to play their instrument.
Well, it's funny because when you said Ron was playing drums in my head, I'm thinking like, wow, I didn't even know Ron played the drums.
Yeah, I kind of like froze for a second. Like, am I supposed to know that he's a drummer? Yeah. How did I not know that? And then
Guess not.
He could keep a beat, but not much else, which is still more than I could do. I mean, I can't like get my hands and feet to work together that for some reason. But actually, I heard you mention that one time on a podcast, and I was like, "That's the same as me. If all I had was a snare, I could keep a beat.
Yeah, I can
Once
air
you put
drum
like a bass and a
better
cymbal,
than anyone you know.
Yeah,
I am the greatest air drummer. I'll put it on Long Island, but could be the tri-state area
for sure.
Yeah.
So Ron's gone, and then from there, what happens?
I think we got a drummer from this Long Island band called Overthrow. They were like along the tough guy vein, but he was a punk rock kid. I don't remember. It was either him or Jim Connerboy. Both of them were in early lineups. And Gary's best friend, this guy, John Leonardi, who you might remember from Third Column. Like Jim would be talking about all this right-wing stuff, and John would like put an egg in his shoe and put his foot into his shoe and be like, I'm going to beat this scene or something like that. Or he came out in like a Gumby suit one time. Like he would totally like, get under Jim's skin. He was in Third Column for a little while, but he really couldn't take anything serious. I remember we played the Guillotine benefit and we were on stage waiting for him, and that was like the nail in the coffin. Again, Gary was very much like, if we're doing this, we're doing it. We're serious. Right. The people in the band are going to be serious. I want to know that you want to do this for real. We started writing, and we went through a lot of different members in the early days, to get a solid lineup. And basically, that's really just how it started and why it started. We wanted something that kicked back to the stuff that we were, that we grew up on listening to. I mean, I didn't technically listen to hardcore growing up, but my first years that I listened to it, this is more what I expected of it and stuff like that. And there was also very much, and this goes back to what you were saying with the yardstick and everything, there was really a lot of like hero worship going on at this point. And some of the local bands, I'm not going to name names, like I said, but really ate it up. There really was a little bit of attitude at some of these shows where like, guys in bands put themselves above the people seeing them, which was sickening because going way back, this might be really tough editing for you guys. I don't know how you're going to do it. But
I'll figure
to go
it out.
way back to like
It's all gold so far.
Yeah, so far.
Good.
Got a lot of
So
gems.
the to go way back, one of the things that really drew me in the beginning and that turned me off to the Dead was the size of the crowd and the disconnect between the fans and the, well, not just the Dead, all the, I was huge, and I still am a huge Neil Young fan. I waited 3 hours outside his dressing room one time, and I couldn't come out for like 12 people waiting for autographs. But when I went to see these and I saw these bands like Bold and Gorilla Biscuit just walking up down the street, I watched the singer Bad Trip get mugged by some of the guys in DMS for a pack of cigarettes.
Jesus. Poor Freddie.
That was just another random thought. That didn't help. That didn't influence me. But it was the connection. Gorilla Biscuits is dancing to Burn 1 minute and then they're playing the next. Like that was a huge, huge part of it for me. Like the connection, and that's something I was really looking for my last years as like a Deadhead or a classic rock fan, was this disconnect between the audience and the band and the ticket prices too. And it's funny because now I look back and I'm like, it was like $15. And I was like,
Yeah,
that's an outrage.
Yeah.
And it's funny that it never bothered you until you got into the hardcore scene. It wasn't like you were thinking, I really would like to be closer to fucking David Bowie. That's just the way it is. But then when you get into
You see
a
something
scene
different.
that breaks down those
Yeah.
barriers, you're like, wow. Like I remember seeing, Ludachrist, and then out in the parking lot was Tommy Christ, and you think like, I was so young that he must be like famous because he's on a record.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you're like, he's
exactly.
right out in the parking lot. That's so cool. And then like over the years, like those things would happen. You'd be like, wow, I love Gorilla Biscuits and their Civ, and it just changes how you view things. And then when you see someone acting like a rock star outside, if they're on the stage, you can be a rock star, do your thing. But when you see them off stage and they're acting like that still, and they act like Freddie Mercury, you're like, what the fuck? It like ruins you forever. You got to be like.
Yeah, it was a big bum out, and there was a lot of it going on, not to the extreme where bands would necessarily hide backstage, but they would have an attitude, almost be condescending to their fans if their fans weren't wearing the right clothes and stuff like that. And that's a big thing that I took on the road with Kill Your Idols when we started the tour. Like if I saw, when the Marilyn Manson thing got big, I remember specifically playing down here in Daytona Beach. We had a really big following, a lot of good friends, and there was like a bunch of Marilyn Manson kids, and like, of course, like the older hardcore and straight kids were all making fun of him, and I was like, fuck that. Nobody is getting made fun of at our shows. Mm-hmm. Like everyone is welcome. And again, keep in mind, most of my hardcore ethics came from ABC, not CBs, not like New York hardcore in that form. And I was like, this band is for all outcasts and wimps and losers, and nobody's going to get picked on. Like, what, you think that you looked cool with a bleached flat top 10 years ago?
Right.
Is that where the name
You're
came
not going to
from?
make fun of people while we play,
Is that where the name came from?
Kill Your Idols?
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. Ironically, it was also the name of a Situated Chaos song. And like I said, Vinny's the one who put me and Gary in touch with each other.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of worked out perfect. But that's exactly what it means. And that was another thing, again, with Gary, like I said, when he was like, I'm not half-assing this. Even our name, we were like, we want a name that's not just like, doesn't sound cool. We want something that has like substance behind it and has a meaning. And because that was something that was bumming us out, it really fit in perfect. I mean, we used to just look through our record collections.
And it does sound cool, regardless of what you just said. It actually is like a perfect attitude towards, me and my friend were just talking about the Queen documentary. The Queen
Bohemian
movie,
Rhapsody, yeah.
And we were talking about how like, I love Freddie Mercury and he's like a great rock star, but it's like, would you want to hang out with Freddie Mercury? as a young man, maybe you'd be like, oh, I'd love to hang out with him or Trent Reznor or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's probably not that much fun. They're probably psychopaths who are like self-involved. And then like when you start to, like you were talking about touring, you start meeting the people who you revered. It's often like a huge disappointment because they're not what you thought or what you built them up to be. They're kind of crazy.
I love Appetite for Destruction, but I never want to meet Axl Rose.
See, in my experience in hardcore, though, it's been the opposite. There's been very few bands that I've met that the members were, dicks or cocky or anything like.
But not really hardcore. More, I don't know if you toured with metal bands or bigger.
No, we didn't.
That was like a whole other level of like. Yeah, it's just a whole other world.
George, it's metal touring. The
metal touring was actually fun.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
I'd imagine it had its moments, but I was never, like, so many hardcore kids got into it through metal. I mean, the guys, Gary and Paul and Rafe and even Ron and, basically all my close friends loved metal, and it was a constant argument in the band. I would always be like, there's enough music we all like. Do we have to listen to Destruction? But through the years, there was definitely, again, it's the same thing that I like about hardcore. It's like there was a couple of thrash bands that they were just straightforward and they had a good hook, and then, it kind of, I got into, a little bit of it along the way, but I was never big on metal. Even the metal scene always seemed like the metal heads in my high school were like, they weren't very cool. I'll just put it that way. They might have been, to them. They were really into, like, they were dust heads, but they were bullies. That was a big thing. A lot of them were like bullies. They would pick on other kids, which I've never been into.
Speaking of punk bands with melody, whose idea was it to cover the Jawbreaker song "Do You Still Hate Me"?
Oh, it was me, and it wasn't an idea; it was inevitable. I forced those guys into liking Jawbreaker. I mean, I went, I have 2 Jawbreaker tattoos, and they were one of my favorites, and they are a big influence. My writing really changed when I got, like, I was into Jawbreaker, but they were just another band. And then at a certain point in life, I got really, really into them. And that, my song writing style completely changed from writing, general songs about politics and being, people and, for lack of a better term, love songs. Instead of writing like general songs, I wrote my story. I wrote about my life specific. And that was like directly from what I got from his, his writing and Jawbreaker and stuff. I mean, I'm still a huge fan, but it's kind of sad when you're not depressed and lonely. They're not as appealing as they are when you're like in that dark place.
Blake's lyrics are amazing. Even later on in Jets to Brazil, which I actually prefer Jets to Brazil more. But are you a Dear You guy or 24 Hour?
I love it all. I wasn't, because I was around when they were like, we would never sign to a major. And again, I was very, ideology was like a big thing back then. But back then, signing to a major really was like a big deal. And in the long run, look at what it did to hardcore. So, it destroyed some of my favorite bands. Them and Theatera both, will say that.
And that was
signing,
1994, around the time that you Kill Your Idol started, because I know Jawbreaker got signed and Sam I Am and Bad Religion all got signed to Atlantic. I'm pretty sure it was Atlantic.
Well, Bad Religion, I think, again, my timelines are bad, but I think that was later.
Pretty sure it was 94.
I thought Dear You came out earlier, because I remember seeing them at ABC, so it couldn't have been, because they blew up. So they were not playing ABC after they blew up. But he was talking about how there's rumors of them signing to a major, and they never would. And then, the next year they had signed. Was it Geffen? I think.
Maybe it was, because I think the only signing that it worked out for was Bad Religion. I think Bad Religion was the only band that actually seemed to have blown up a little bit more via Atlanta.
That's actually a band I met that were dickheads. When I met them, they were obnoxious guys. I was trying. I used to go see all their like Northeast states, and then I loved that band for years. And I was trying to do a zine with Tyler, actually, at that point. And so I went to interview them, and I asked if they were vegetarian, and Mr. Brett went on this rampage about how not only are they not vegetarian, but that, you know, I mean, somebody must have really like given him a hard time or something, because he went on this rampage that I should throw out all my Bad Religion records because they're not good enough for me. I mean, I didn't even tell him I was a vegetarian. I certainly was past. I would never preach the Bad Religion. So, you know, it was a random dumb question that every zine probably asked every band back then. But he went off on this rampage and then like stormed away and wouldn't do an interview. And then I watched other kids interview them, and they used to just really make fun of kids that were doing fancy. They wouldn't answer any questions seriously, and they would just get up and walk away from people.
Interesting.
That's actually, that popped into my head just now when we were talking about that, and I was really bummed by that for obvious reasons.
All right, so, you know, we touched on it a little bit. And I was asking you, kind of like crept in with a question of like, is that why Kill Your Idols broke up? When we were talking earlier about some of your demons, quote unquote. But I don't think we really got to it, and I've just asked you straight out, and I don't really know the answer. I don't know if it's really ever been put out there. But what was the reason that Kill Your Idols broke up?
There was a couple of reasons, and I used to like to say that hardcore, we didn't outgrow hardcore as much as like it outgrew us. Like the scene was changing again. We were like really kind of like, you know, ethics just didn't seem to be as important anymore, and that was a big deal to us. Like we were a very scene oriented band back then. I can remember being like, you know, look around you. If guys from local bands aren't here seeing other bands, then why do they deserve your support? You know, this is about supporting each other. And we weren't. We had, you know, some of the guys had families at that time. And, you know, another thing, as weird as it is, and maybe you can relate to this, my best writing comes to me when I'm down and out, whether I'm hurting over a breakup or depression or whatever. And at that point, I was in a very good place, and I found it really hard to write. Actually, our last record, Mike and Vinny came in, and really the last full length, they saved. Basically, I wrote a couple of songs, and Vinny wrote a couple, and I think Gary might have also. And what I did was I wrote down what I wanted to write about, and Vinny kind of put it into song form. Like I was just burnt. I mean, we have a lot of releases, not to brag, but between the splits and the full lengths and the EPs, like, you know, we have well over 100 songs, and I was just kind of burnt out on writing. And it's not an ego thing, but I feel like that's my job in the band. Like all these guys are talented musicians and hold their own. If I'm not writing, what am I doing? Just being
yeah, that's a good point.
Just singing. I'm not like a talented singer where anyone can scream, you know? So, you know, the fact that I couldn't write, that I really hit writer's block was part of it. And another thing was we were starting to watch a lot of our peers burn out. You know, bands that have been around for 20 years that couldn't draw 50 kids anymore. And look, there are times that doesn't matter, and there are times it does. Mm-hmm. And we were at a point where Kill Your Idols was like as popular as we had ever been. And we were like, we don't want to wait until it's old and tired. Like, go out on top, leave them wanting more. You know, if I have any regrets, it's that we made it so final. Like, this is it. You're never going to see us again because, in hindsight. But, that was a big reason. I mean, like I said, we flew down to Florida for some shows. All of our old friends were gone. It was a whole new crowd. I was big on, I'm very hot and cold. And if I'm in a mood like tonight, I'll talk endlessly, including on stage. And if I'm not, I just freeze up. But we were on stage and I was talking and I'm like, these kids cannot relate at all to what I'm saying.
They're not really hearing you.
Yeah, like hardcore, not to say what hardcore is, but when we were into it, like it's what, and you bragged about it. Like, this is my life. And and it meant everything to you. For a lot of these kids, I remember there was like the club we were at was having like an 80s dance party later that night. And the kids couldn't wait for that. Like, fuck the bands. They couldn't wait to dance to 80s music, which is really what pushed hardcore into existing, was this horrible music. But it was just the lack of understanding. I'm like, I don't want to be this dinosaur telling people what hardcore should be, because I didn't want anyone to tell me. Young kids are the ones who really make the scene what it is.
Always. Young kids and straight edge.
Well, of course.
Pretty much that drives everything in hardcore.
But we just felt like we were kind of losing our place, and we didn't want to fall between the cracks. And, between that and my writing, having trouble writing and stuff, we just figured it was really a good time. We had done everything we had ever hoped to do and more. 10 times more. Like earlier when I said that first conversation, we talked about Poison Idea. We have a split with Poison Idea. 7 seconds, we have a split with 7 seconds. Yeah. Voorhees, we have a split with, like, literally every band we named the conversation we ended up touring with. I mean, Poison Idea, when they first came east, called Gary and was like, we want you on all our East Coast shows, which was only like 4, but it's not the point. Incredible. Like, Jerry A had his guy call and be like, we want you. Like, this Poison Idea, is like in the top 3 for us. And the same with 7 seconds. Like, they, I've seen interviews where Kevin has mentioned us as one of his favorite live bands and stuff like that. And so anything we ever dreamed of doing, we did. And it was the right time. And it was the right time, because our last shows were really special. People made all kinds of baked goods, which was funny, but also all kinds of homemade Kill Your Idol shirts with like graves and the skull crying.
How do you feel? How do you feel now that you could, it's a documented show, like on occasion, if you're sitting in Florida, let's say, you don't have any shows on the calendar and you put on that last show. How does that make you feel?
Oh, it's still, I have 12 scrapbooks full of letters, reviews, interviews, pictures, everything. I'm very nostalgic about my whole life growing up. I talk to my old friends, everything. That show though, and the Webster Hall show are my 2 like prizes. Like, if someone I know is not into hardcore, is like, oh, let me see a video of your band. It's one of those that I break out. I mean, it was really. Again, you don't realize when you're in a band, you lose sight of how much you mean to people. You don't realize, at least I never did. I never had a big, like, me and Gary would joke around and be like, man, we rule. But in reality, we never knew if anyone was going to come see us or not. And
everything is hindsight. When you're in it, you kind of like eye of the storm. You just don't see it. And then when you can look back.
I actually just remembered you were speaking about that one of your recent interviews on tour. Like, when you're on tour, you don't want to be there. And then you're home and you're like, what the hell am I doing? I want to be on tour. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, it's a lot like that. Like, I look back at it and I'm like, why did we stop? But that show was really, that one in the parking lot is really like I look at it as historical. I mean, I'm a member of the band, but I hope other people do.
It is historical.
Yeah, I think a lot of people definitely.
I mean, I have like, there were so many really emotional posts about it. And again, I kept all, I printed it all out. I have it all in scrapbooks, and it was amazing that. And then when we came back and did Webster Hall, that was like the closest I've ever been to being like a rock star.
Right.
I mean, we've played giant like some of the festivals in Europe, but they're there to see, Typo and Slayer. They just happen to be out there when we're playing. But Webster Hall was. It can't. I had always wanted to do. I told Gary after we were apart for 2 or 3 years, like, yo, let's just do something. I'd love to play again, and he wasn't ready. And there definitely was some animosity is built up. There was no hatred, but there was a little bit of tension. And then, like 7 years after we broke up, he called me out of the blue and said we got offered to do that Black and Blue show with Judge.
Yeah.
At Webster Hall. And again, I was the easy one. I was like, I'm in. Tell me, let's do it. And, I don't know if you were there or seen video of it, but that was...
It was incredible.
I can't even imagine being in a band where it's like that every night, like someone like Sick of It All or something where, I mean, it was just like wall to wall in Webster Hall, it was insane. And people, again, we always had that attachment, and I've heard other bands say this, and I feel the same way. I feel funny calling them fans, but for lack of a better term, our fans, we've always had a really good bond with. And, again, they had like, welcome back signs. There was a big welcome back Kill Your Idols banner up front, and all the guys with the costumes, which was like an inside joke between us and some of the Long Island kids like Hugo that used to come see us all the time. And I mean, but again, at that period, we were like every show, we were like, this is it. This is the last time you're going to see us.
And Hugo's in the band now. Look at that.
Yes, he is. And you know what? I can't think of anyone else I would have added.
But special shout out to Hugo, because
he's our sponsor.
He's the sponsor. And just a quick little asterisk, we were trying to get to talk to you face to face.
Yes.
And it just didn't work out. You're going to be playing on Sunday at St. Vitus in Brooklyn, so it makes sense that we could see you. That was just all the stuff that we were trying to get face to face didn't work out, and then you're going to come back in August, and then maybe we'll do it then. But it just kind of hit me like,
that's right. We're playing the same. We're playing Wildfest together.
Yeah, and we just figured like let's talk to Andy because it seemed weird in a way. Me and Sam were talking about this, and we haven't had you on yet. And then like we were talking to Hugo, and like wow, just Andy.
Hugo,
like we're kind of like what.
The obvious.
It was obvious, but it was just kind of like I wanted to jump in for a second because Hugo is a big part of a lot of he plays with 64, right? 64.
Yeah.
He plays with John and Scott, and he's part of the podcast in a way because he's a sponsor, and you brought him up, so we just want to shout that out.
Not only that, but since we're talking him up. Hugo has been a great person since I've known him. Like I said earlier, when I was down and out and people were piling on, Hugo always had my back, and he always had the time to talk to me when it's not like he's in my inner circle, one of my best friends, but it doesn't matter. When I reached out to him, because he knew some of the people that had some issues, he always would take the time to talk, and he always had my back. And seriously, when the four of us started playing, originally it was the other lineup with Paul and Rafe. They're busy with Black Amber. When Vinny and Mike and me and Gary got back together, we were like, this is it. If anyone can't do it, we're done. If one of us can't do a show, there's no fill-ins, it's over. Like, if there's any animosity starting to build, we end the band. Like, I don't want to lose any more friends. I don't want anyone to be unhappy or feel like we have to do this. We've been talking about writing songs. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Like there's no pressure, and we don't want to have pressure.
That was actually the question I was going to ask.
About what? Writing?
Yeah, just because like you were talking about like writer's block so long ago, and so much time has passed, and it seems like you're in a better place, and the band seems to be, something you remember fondly, but you still play. And so it's almost like a no pressure thing, more of like a fun thing that you guys get to do.
Well, it definitely is. And it's like, you gotta, Vinny especially has brought up several times, like, I feel like we're almost gypping people by not offering something new. And I was like, we were kind of like, well, they know what they're getting. It's a once in a rare while thing. I mean, everyone wants to hear the old songs anyway, but let's see what happens. Again,
Do you
no
want
pressure.
to create new stuff?
I am working on some stuff, and so is Gary and those guys as far as writing. To get back to Hugo just very quick, I wanted to say,
Sure.
So it was the four of us. There's no one else I would have taken on as a fifth but him. He's just really a great guy. He's been a diehard Kill Your Idols, part of like the family for as long as I can remember. So like, since you guys were throwing him props, I just figured I would put that out there too.
Yeah.
For sure. It's, we got to throw him some props every
We
now
were
and
actually kind of thinking, like, if you came to Long Island and we were going to do this at Hugo's house, maybe we could have you and Hugo.
Yeah.
And, like, we had all these, and the thing that I know is that if you're going to we started planning it, I was like, I don't want to put it off. If we start putting it off to August, then it's just, it goes into the ether. It was like we were starting to talk about, we got to get Andy. Let's get Andy. Even though you're going to be here this weekend in New York doing your show at St. Vitus, we're like, let's just do the phone call. Let's get it done. And
you know what? We had more time this way, really. Like, I'm flying in Friday night. I'm flying home Sunday night. And Gary, he's driving me. He's got a family at home, so I can't be like, come on, we got to go. I got an interview to do. Like,
Right.
Again, because there were some animosities in the past, I don't ever want to put, anything I might have put the guys because of the issues that I've had in the past. Sometimes maybe I even overcompensate, but I really don't want to do anything that's going to put anyone out. It's enough that they got to come get me at the airport and drop me off.
And
Which
overcompensating for
obviously
good
they don't
dudes
wanna
is
do.
okay. For Gary's another, brother from another mother. I love that guy. Like for
Gary is
many, many reasons, I could probably do a few minutes on Gary alone, just like you.
He's one of my truest friends. If he thinks, if he's mad at you, he tells you. He doesn't tell other people, Andy's a dick. He comes to you. We've had at times where me and Gary didn't talk for a year or even two one time. But you know what? You know where you stand with Gary. Always. He doesn't beat around the bush. He's one of my best friends, and he's one of, like I said, he's one of the most real people that I know. And, I wouldn't have done anything with Kill Your Idols without Gary. Like, he really, it sounds funny, but he taught me everything about being in a band as far as being a professional, not just being, a goofy punk band and this and that. And some people have accused us of taking ourselves too serious, but in the long run, it's what worked for us.
People accused you of taking yourself too seriously.
Oh yeah, they, hardcore. It's just a band, and this, it's just a band. It's not like you're making you're living. Even though for 10 years this was our living, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a long period of time where we lived on the road. There was no full-time work at home or anything. But yeah, there were definitely people that felt, like you take the whole thing too serious. But if you're gonna do it right.
Yeah, it's like a loaded idea. Like, you take yourself too seriously, and it's like, in some ways you have to. In some ways, I get the idea, like, don't take yourself too seriously, but it's like, if you're a young man in a band and you don't take it seriously, I don't trust you. I don't know. You got to go for it, right? I mean, what else can you do? Your band's not going to do too much if you just don't take it seriously. Then,
Plus, for me, as the guy who was writing down everything that I had gone through and stuff, it caused, a very strong bond between a lot of our, fans and friends and, the people that supported us. Like, it's funny. Someone explained to me one time, they're like, there's two sets of Kill Your Idols fans. There's kids that just love your hardcore, and then there's fans of your writing. which, you know, I took as, you know, a complete honor and stuff. But looking back through these scrapbooks I have and the letters from all these kids, you know, those aren't about, you know, the great moth beats that Gary comes up with. They're about, you know, the songs and the lyrics and stuff like that. So taking it serious is what got us as far as we did get, which, you know, some people like, oh, you could have been more successful. I'm like, we took it as far as a band can. We've been all over the world. For 10 years, like I said, we didn't have to work jobs. We had releases upon releases with our favorite band. Like you know, what more can you hope to do as a hardcore band?
Not
you know,
much.
some of my friends that aren't into hardcore are like, you know, did you make $1 million? And I'm like,
hindsight's always 20.
Yeah, I was gonna say those people never get it. Like
human nature.
Yeah, like we'll be playing and my boss or someone will be like, "How much money did you make tonight?" I'm like,
yeah,
what are you talking about?
That they don't get.
No,
but
sure.
Anyone that's a musician, and since a lot of my older friends are like hippies and stuff, they play music, and every one of them, they do understand because they're playing the same bar they were playing when we were 18. So they look at it and they're like, you did it, man. I remember one of my friends was like, you lived a dream of millions of like young boys that like look in their mirror and sing to their favorite rock band and dream of being on stage. And I'm like, man, why didn't you talk to me before we broke up? Like, I never thought of it that way.
So in closing, for the rest of 2019, anything that you want to say before we wrap up? Anything that Kill Your Idols has going after August?
I believe we're actually playing Gainesville Fest in November. I'm not 100% sure. Other than that, we have nothing planned. We're wide open to play anywhere if the timing and everything works out. We might write some new stuff. We might not. We are leaning towards it. I will say that. And just, you know, I can't say how much for all of us. I can say how thankful we are that people still come out and see us and support us. And, you know, it's really, really appreciated because, you know, again, hardcore, there's 10 bands for everyone that breaks up. And the fact that there's still people that lay down their hard-earned money to come see us is very appreciated.
It's still to draw crowds, still to, you know, we talk to a lot of people, and sometimes the reason for not doing it is because people aren't coming, and people are still coming for you guys. And when you think about it, get Coach Gary in to help you do a new record. Guys got to do a new record. That's my vote. What do you say, Sam? Yeah,
I think, to be honest, as a musician, for sure, like you said, everyone wants to hear the old songs, and I get that. But I think as far as, like, for your soul and Gary, you know, it's nice to just... And Hugo, yeah, Hugo's got to be on one of those records. Do it for him, if anyone. Yeah. But it's just like, you know, people want to hear the old song, sure, but for the band itself, there's nothing better than just putting together, even like an EP of 4 songs. It just, I feel like it would
We are definitely, like I said, we are leaning towards it. That was like another part of the band I loved, creating it. You know, this is the only, at that point, this was the only band I had ever done. So I never even went through the whole creative process of, you know, writing and Gary putting it to music. And I don't know, he just had this way of matching my lyrics to the right music to give the right feel to songs. But I do think we are going to write because, like I said, this is my first podcast and I was talking to Gary and Hugo about it. I'm like, you know, I feel like it's just, we might still play, but it's like, we're not a relevant part of things anymore. And they're like, well, we got to write. You got to put something new out. So that really kind of helped push me over the edge. And they were like, you know, me and my wife have talked about possibly coming back to New York in the next year or two, which would make it, if that happens, I could say we're almost definitely going to write some new stuff. But we're still leaning towards it for a lot of reasons.
Gary's going to send you some music. I guarantee it. I'm going to text him tonight. Yeah. Send him some music that's going to start the whole thing. Yeah. But let's close this off on a good note. Let's do what we always do. We ask a final question. So for every guest, we ask the same question. Name of the podcast is If I Ruled the World. So we ask you, Andy West, if you ruled the world, what would that look like?
Honestly, this is the one question I knew was coming, and I've been trying to think of some great, either funny or profound answer, and I don't have one. It would just be a kinder, happier world where people were treated with respect when they deserve it, and that's really it. It would just be a kinder world.
Well, I can respect that.
Yeah.
Short and sweet, just like Achille Idol's great song. Short and sweet.
Thank you.
For sure. So, Andy, thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you,
And,
guys. I appreciate it.
That's it. So we're good to go.
If I